now. All right, welcome back. We are Game 2005 in the fall 2021 semester for Game Physics at George Brown, and it's week 10, part 2 of our broadcast. We're going to be doing the Unity Hour right now. Let's talk about where we're at. So again, we just talked about 2D collisions and some optimization ideas. And now we're going to move into Unity UI and camera controls. Okay, so we're going to start off with a project from last day. And last day, what I did was I shared with you a starter repo for assignment 3. I've put updated here, which means this is where I'm going to put the updates. And I put the link in there just in case you don't have the link handy because it's in the previous content area. But it's the same, assignment or the same link that I've been using for this assignment from before. I'm not sure if Joss has also used this basic starter or not. I'm hoping that he might have tried that, but we're going to add to it on our end. All right, so let's get to it. So again, I'm going to start off with this one, the starter. And let's see what we have from last day. Okay, and we'll talk about what we have and what our goals are for this one. My first goal is really around camera control. So I want to be able to add some camera control. So when I'm in real time, when I'm playing in real time, as an example, then I want to bring up some camera controls, right, that are here. Then the next one is I want to make some of this work, right? So some of these, this control panel and everything else, I want to be able to, put away the control panel with code. I want to, make the buttons work and so on. I want to talk about these things. A couple things to do. First, let's do the camera controller. And again, this would be a script that we're going to write inside Unity. Again, I'm starting with the project from last week, exactly where we started off from last week. Notice, by the way, when I kind of shrink this out, you can see that the box is changed in size because it's proportional to the size of my screen. We can change this to make it not like this in a second. But for now, it's an issue. Okay, this is a problem, right? So if I make my screen shorter, then box is gone, right? And if I make it wider, it becomes wider. And I don't want that to happen. I want it to be fixed. So that's some things we have to fix up too. But let's go back into script. So when you write a script, you right-click here and you create a C# script. You guys should know this from the stuff you're doing with JOS. But we're going to call this the camera controller. All right. And I want to move the camera around in real time. So instead of me looking at this thing from one angle all the time, I want to, in real time, I want to use my, WASD keys to fly through, if you will, or move the camera around so I can inspect the box from different angles. Okay, that's what it's for. So let's talk about the camera controller. And again, I'll get you to know Unity a little better too. So one thing is, it's a C# script. It's going to be, we're going to launch Visual Studio 2019, and we're also going to be using ReSharper for C#. Right, so ReSharper doesn't work just for C++, of course, it works with C#, and it opens up a very simple script. What I want to do before I even code is I want to take my main camera and I want to drag and drop the camera controller onto it, like so. So there's my main camera. And when I go back to my code then, in here, what I want to start thinking about is how I can make my control happen. So I can put remember, maybe Joss had talked to you about this before, but we can, first of all, one thing to note, and this is going back to SDL, the thing we did together for AI, if you notice that we have a start and an update function. And remember in SDL, we did this on purpose. When I built SDL engine for you guys with Alex and with everybody else, we added start and update so that when you finally did Unity, you'd be like, wait, we've seen a start function. We've seen an update function. And it's kind of the same thing. It should kind of slowly gel you into what this thing would look like, okay? Mono behavior, we need to attach. This camera controller class inherits from, that's what the colon means, inherits from mono behavior, right? And mono behavior is required if I want to attach any script to any object. If I remove mono behavior, I cannot attach that script to an object. I'd have to make it into a singleton or some other kind of object, okay? So here in the my script, remember, because it's attached to an object, I want to expose certain variables on the inspector. So again, I'm going to use a header for this. A header is a separator on the inspector where I'm going to say this is my controls for my camera. And then we're going to say we're going to make a public control that we're going to use, that we're going to call sensitivity. Sensitivity. Okay, and I want to assign a value to that right away. So I'm going to say that the sensitivity is going to be something like 1,000. All right. We'll talk about this, what this is. It's a floating point number. And if I was just to save this right now, just the way it is, and go back to Unity, and if I look down here, I can see that in the inspector, there is the header. It says controls, right? And then there's my sensitivity number, 1,000. So it starts off with a number. Again, we can modify this as we go, but for now, that's what it looks like. All right, so that's the first thing. So sensitivity. So that's the first thing. The other one is we want to figure out the x-axis rotation. This will be a private member, so anything public will be exposed in the inspector. Anything private will not be exposed. So we want this x-axis rotation, which we're going to initialize at 0.0. Okay, we're going to make that a float as well. Okay, I also want to have access to my mouse, so we're going to make that a vector 2, because I want to have my mouse itself. I want to map out where my mouse is going to be, because I'm going to use my mouse in order for me to move things around. Okay. The other one I want to do is we're going to be talking about when I want to use my mouse and keyboard to look around, right? I can use serialized field for private for sure. And then it would work as well. But for my mouse, what I also want to do is I want to look at the cursor, and I want to change the lock state, is what it is, so that the cursor lock state is locked, which means that when I start off my scene for the camera, for my mouse, right, then my cursor state is locked. Let's see what that looks like just by accessing this thing. So if I go back to the scene and press play, right, as an example, and I click on the scene, you don't see my cursor anymore. Cursor's gone, right, until I press escape. And that's kind of how it works, right? I don't want to have my cursor flying around, because maybe I'm going to touch something over here with my cursor when I'm using fly-through controls, okay? So cursor lock state is locked, is what you want to put in there. And then in the update function, we want to do a couple of things. We want to say that my, mouse X, right, is equal to the input.getAccess, right? And I want to use mouse X. I'm using the old input system for this, right? Multiplied by my sensitivity, right? And my mouse Y, right, is equal to my input. How about mouse.y? Mouse.y is equal to my input.getAccess, and then it's going to be again the mouse Y, right? So I've got mouse Y and mouse X, and I'm getting input in the update function to these two things. All right, so that's what it does right now. And this gets input. So get input from mouse. That's what this does, okay? Input is the input system. Access, we have access names for X and Y for mouse, and there's other access names as well that you can use. All right, we also want to look up and down. That's what we want to do, right? And we can say that the x-axis rotation, right, is minus equals to the mouse.y, okay? And x-axis rotation is equal to the mathf.clamp. Clamp, remember, we know a clamp value means that we want to clamp a value between a minimum and a maximum, where we take the x-axis rotation and we want to clamp it so that it doesn't go beyond negative 90f and 90f. We don't want that to happen. And then what we want to do is we want to say that transform local rotation is equal to a quaternion Euler, right? We're going to rotate using a quaternion Euler rotation across the x-axis And what we want to do is we want to do 0.0f and 0.0f for the y and the z. And what this will do is this will be look up and down. That's what this part will do. Let's try this part, just looking up and down with our mouse. So save and go back and try it. And now you can see that as I'm looking up, I'm actually moving my camera around. Take a look at that, right? It's really odd though, because look how fast that's moving. It's moving way too fast because my sensitivity is huge, right? So we can cut that down. We can say instead of 1,000 for sensitivity, let's make that 100. Let's see what that does, right? So again, we can try it again with a different number, right? And now you can see that it's better. And all we can do is move up and down with our camera. With 100, 100 seems to be about right, right? If you don't like that sensitivity, you can definitely reduce that to something else, okay? But up and down motion with the mouse and the scene looks okay. Now how about left and right? So this is the first piece. So again, look left and right, right? And rotate around the y-axis. This is what we want to do here. So I want to say something like, so how do I do that, right? Well, I want to do a transform dot rotate, right? And I want to rotate my camera around the vector 3, right, dot up. Okay, that's what I want to do. And then multiplied by my mouse dot x. Okay, so that's how it works. So rotate, what it does is it applies a rotation of Euler angles, degrees, around the z-axis, right, as an example. Okay, so that's what it does. Let's try this out and see what this does. Does it actually do what I want? The vector that I'm rotating is around this one, multiplied by my mouse x. My mouse x is the information I'm getting from my mouse, multiplied by my sensitivity. Okay, let's see if this works at all. So again, let's run it. And can I look around in the scene? So again, we're good, but when I start moving this way or that way, it kind of looks pretty clunky. So why is that? So take a look at that rotation. I'm trying to rotate it, right? Up and down looks okay, but the right and the left, not really working. So what's happening there? Why is that rotate around not happening? Well, what we did was we limited it. We said, the x-axis rotation, right, for up and down, we clamped it to -90 and 90, right? Let's see what happens if I take that clamping away and see what I get, right, as we go forward. Again, think about, I'm rotating around, transform, right, rotate, right, around the up rotation using the mouse X information, right? So let's try that out. And let's see if this makes a difference at all. It shouldn't, because notice that this is the X rotation is, we're using the blank X axis, not the X rotation, right? So that means we shouldn't have a difference. We shouldn't make a difference when we rotate. So again, if we took away that issue, I can kind of go upside down now. It's pretty, it'll make you sick if you look at it. That's what the -90 and 90 is. When I go up, it works okay. But what about to the right? It's just not wanting to turn at all, right? You know, as I'm rotating stuff, it's just not doing it. Why isn't it? I'm moving across the x-axis, right? But it's not really rotating my object around anything at all. Why wouldn't it be? Think about the numbers that I'm getting from my mouse X and mouse, my mouse capability, right? My rotating ability, right? So transform rotate, it's rotating around an axis, right? And it's rotating around the y-axis, the up. That's what I'm doing here, right? Let's put this back in so I can show you what the difference is between one and the other, right? What can we do? And why isn't this working? What's actually happening? So what you can do is, if you leave this the way it is and go back to the scene, instead of looking at it in here, right? So we run it like normal, but instead of looking at it in here, what about if we went to the scene and we looked at it from a 3D perspective again. Let's go back to that camera, and here's the camera. Okay, so here's where it's looking. Okay, it's looking way up there, right? Way up in the sky right now, right? Why is it looking up in the sky? Because that's the last place we left it, right? So here's where we want to do it. I want to escape. And even if I escape out of here, right, as soon as I try and rotate it, and this is a way of doing it too, let's do it so that we split screen for a second. I'll put the camera controls down here, right? And we can see what's happening to the camera up here. So I want you to see what's happening first, okay? So you tell me what's happening. So I look up at the camera. Looking up is okay, right? But what about to the right and to the left? Look what's happening. Why is this happening? It's like it's clamped. Like I can't do my motion whatsoever, right? I'm moving 100 sensitivity and I'm not rotating around at all. Why is this happening? Here it's okay, but this part is just not going. I need mouse Y, okay? So maybe that's the issue. So mouse X is this way, right? Mouse Y is this way. Why would you say I need mouse Y? I mean, isn't the mouse X the one, the thing that I want? Because mouse Y, right, that's what's giving me the X rotation. I'm rotating across the X axis, right? Mouse X is rotating around the X axis, but I'm using a transform rotate, right? I'm using a transform rotate. Let's see if we can do the same thing that we did before. Instead of using a transform rotate, what about if we did an Euler rotation like we kind of did up here? So we said transform dot local rotation, right? And that's equal to a quaternion Euler, right? And what we want to do is we don't want to rotate around the the x-axis now. It's going to screw us up. But let's see if we can only rotate across like the y-axis. So we're going to comment this one out. We're not going to do anything with this. And we're going to do it the other way around. So we're going to say across the y-axis, right, is what I want to do. I want to rotate across the y because the y-axis is the top. So I want to rotate across the y-axis some mouse x, right? Mouse.x value and nothing across the z-axis. We don't need to do that. No rotation that way, right? How is that going to help? Remember, quaternion Euler means I want to use Euler angles to rotate. So mouse x across the y-axis. Let's see how that works, right? And is the y-axis correct, right? Because the y-axis is this way, so I want to turn kind of on a corkscrew from the top, right? Mouse X is just the input that I'm getting. I want to move my mouse right and left, but I want a corkscrew from the top. That's what I want to do. That's why it's in the Y position. Let's see if this works any better, right? And if I was going to try this out, right, and this is the first part of our movement, right, then if I move to the right and left, it kind of snaps around again. Take a look at that. And even if I go really, really slow, right, up and down doesn't do anything anymore. I've locked that. But if I go really, really slow, the camera just does not want to move too much. Why is that, guys? I'm trying, but as I move it, right, I move my object, right? Take a look. It's like it snaps back to zero, right? Because that's what's happening with my y-axis. That's why we use this X rotation thing, right? We use the X rotation because we want to get a number, right, from my mouse. And we want to say exactly what this is. Minus equal. X rotation, we start off with something. Notice that X rotation starts at 0. We need another one like this. Just so you understand the script. That's why I'm doing this. So x-axis rotation means I'm going to rotate up and down across the x-axis, right? I'm going to flip across the x-axis. Y-axis means I'm going to go left and right, right? And I want to kind of do what we're doing here for our look transformation. So let's do that. We'll say something like y-axis rotation. And let's use a minus equals again and see if how that works. Minus equals mouse.x, right? And do we really want to clamp? Well, yeah, because if I allow myself to go, I can keep moving all the way around. If I keep pushing my mouse around, I'll turn around and around and around and around. And I really don't want that to happen, right? So that's why we clamp it. So we can do the same thing, but let's try without no clamping whatsoever. Instead of using direct of mouse X, let's use Y-axis rotation. Let's use that instead. And let's see how that works with my local transform. So again, I run it, and if I'm good, then now you can see that we can move to the right. But when I move to the right, I go to the left, and that's not what I want. So that we can take this away and make this plus equals instead of minus equals. We want the regular one to do, right, when we fly through. Okay, and again, I'm using inverted controls. You may not like that. So again, I move to the right, move to the left. Now we're good, right? It's pretty sensitive still. I think even 100 might be too much. Let's go with something smaller, like 50. And let's see how that looks when I try it again, right? Because maybe it's too much. It's too much for me. You might like it, but I think it's way too sensitive. That looks a little better, right? As an example, where I'm looking right and left. But we have no up and down control because I've taken that away. All right, cool. So we've got right and left, and we have up and down, right? As an example, I didn't clamp it, but what if we can combine some of this stuff? Let's take this here and put that here, right? Before we do the transform, we do this piece, and we just combine it. We combine both X and Y rotations in one. So we kind of say, okay, we want to do a quaternion Euler. We want to use Euler angles, right? And we want to use the Y-axis rotation here. Can we do that? Is that going to be okay? How does this work? All right, so let's see how this works. And we're not clamping it. And do we need to clamp it is the question, right? So let's try this out and go back. And let's see how this works. So again, now you can see that I can look up and down. I can look left and right, but I can keep looking left and right forever, right? And the question is, do you want this to happen? Do I want to be able to look more than 90 degrees? And the answer is probably not. So that's why we do the clamping. But now we're able to look around with the camera, right? So again, using the same clamping idea, we'll just copy paste. And we can say that the Y-axis rotation this time is also clamped. If you don't like the 90, you can also do a wider angle, right? Let's see what this does for us. If we say minus 90 to a 90, right? Let's see what that does for us. And we don't need this piece. So this is look left and right. And this is actually transform, actually perform the angle. Okay. We can actually just say rotate. How about this? Rotate. All right. So let's go and see how that works. Going back to this, does that make any difference? Does it make it better, make it worse? How does it feel, right? So I can't move more than this, and I can't move more than that. I can't move more than this or that. That's pretty good, actually. All right. And now we can look around using our look controls, as opposed to wherever I'm looking up and down, that's wherever my mouse points is where I'm looking, based on the initial angle that my camera was looking in the first place. So you can see what that does on the top. Okay, pretty cool. Questions around any of this? Because this is what's happening with the camera. The camera is moving first. The next thing that we want to do is we want to make it so that the player, right, itself, kind of moves, right, based on the input that we're going to get, right? So we get some kind of movement for this thing. And so let's think about, these are the controls, right? And we know the sensitivity is what we want. We know sensitivity should start something like 50, that 1,000 is too crazy, all right? Yes, Sam. It snaps because mouse X, remember mouse X and Y goes to 0, and once it goes to 0, so Neil says 10 is better. Sure, let's go 10. I don't mind going 10. Again, we're just trying to make it so it's more usable, right? We want to make a system where we can kind of do some inspection, and we want to look around with the camera controller, right? So we can kind of do that. Let's take a look and see how that works, right? Maybe that is more control, Neil, right? So we can kind of do that. And if you snap in there, it kind of, does that. 10 might be fine. All right, what about the next piece, which is I've done controls, right? So this is camera control. Camera look is what this is, right? So I'll say look controls. And the other one is movement controls. So you want another header. This will just separate this. This will be for movement, right? And let's think about what that is. We need a public float, something like a max speed, okay? So the fastest we can move. I'm going to set it up as some defaults again. We can adjust these as we go, right? We also need some kind of other controls, right? Like let's look at a public vector 3 called velocity. I want to just see what my velocity is. That's just a debug thing. Okay. I don't care if I'm grounded in this case or not, right? I don't care about any of that kind of stuff. The only thing I care about is I want to be able to get input and I want to move. All right. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. All right. So, how do I move? Well, I want to get inputs from my keyboard this time, right? So we have mouse input, and what we can do is we can kind of get all of this, and this is kind of check look. We can kind of right click and go to refactor and extract a method, and we can call this method something like, a check look method, right? So I'm going to check look or look around, a look method, call it look. We can also say mouse look if you want to be really specific, doesn't matter. And the mouse look is what the first thing we do. The second thing we want to do is we want to have another function. Let's make it a private void function that we're going to call mouse move, right? And the mouse move method is going to move us, or this would be like almost like a keyboard move, right? Call it move. And the move is going to take in a couple of things, right? We need to get a float x, which is going to be equal to an input.getAxis, and we want horizontal. All right, so that's kind of our horizontal move, and a float y, which is kind of an input.getAxis vertical. So vertical and horizontal include the arrow keys as well as the WASD keys, vertical and horizontal, and as well as controller support. It gives you controller support from the get-go. All right. So that's what we get right away. And what I want to do with this one is I want to move. Okay, that's what I want to do. And I want to move my object where I'm looking. Okay, that's what I want to kind of do. I want to look, and wherever I'm looking, that's where I want to move. Okay, so that's what's happening. So, and there's some things that we can do, right, to make it so that we can move in the direction that we're looking. Okay, so does anyone have an idea of how this is? This is just input. I'm getting input x and y coordinates, right? And I'm going to, on the x coordinate, I'm going to move with my W key, and my A and D keys are going to be my Y coordinate, right? So this is easy. The Y coordinate is going to move according to when I change my angle, when I'm looking at a specific spot, right, as an example, right, then how do I move my camera based on, my keys? I want to move my object, right? So, okay, local rotation, that's true. But what am I looking at is what I'm saying, right? So my camera has a couple of things. Camera.main, let's go to my camera object, .main, and we have some things that the camera can do, right? It actually has the camera has a normal, right? It has a way, from a property perspective, right? we have some information about the camera itself. All right, so the main camera, as an example, has a lot of things that we can get from it, right? What is it looking at, right? So if I want to look at the camera itself, right? Whatever that camera is, camera dot, and I can also say the transform dot look. I can look at something that I'm looking at, right? What am I looking at? I'm actually going to rotate towards something that I'm looking at. So when I do a transform look at, right, it gives me a target that I'm going to look at. All right. So that is kind of what I'm doing with these things. This is my look, right? But now I want to do something else. I want to move towards where I'm looking, right? So I want to say, I want to, again, transform, and I want to move towards, right? So vector3 dot move towards is a thing, right? So I can say that what my current vector3 is, my current position, right? And my target position, where I'm going to move towards, right? So where I am towards compared to where I'm moving, right? And this might be something where I want to do. I want to move towards, right, what I'm looking at, okay? So I want you guys to think about this for a second before we go on. So how can I figure this out? The forward vector, there we go. So my camera forward, so my transform.forward is the forward vector, the vector that's coming out of my camera. Wherever I'm looking, that is the direction that I want to go. So if that's true, if I want to do vector3 dot move towards, I want to take remember it returns a vector3 out. That's what it does. So we have to use this information. We can't just do nothing with this, right? So if I look in the current direction and the target, right? So what do I put in here? So current, target, and max distance delta. We know what this is. This is going to be based on my speed, whatever the speed is, right? Every frame, max speed. So it says between the points specified by current and my target, right? So target is going to be what I'm looking at, right? So what's my current? My transformed out position. I'm putting it out there. And my transform dot forward and my max speed. Is that what I want? What does this output? What does this thing give me? As an example, we use velocity, as an option. Let's see if we can say that this is the velocity. The velocity is a vector, right? So we can say velocity, right, is equal to this vector, right? So that's what we want. Right now, we're not doing anything. We're just getting a number. We're getting a vector. Let's see what this does for us when we play the game. So going back to this, right? Let's move this back over here because we don't need to see the scene anymore. And I want to move my camera controller, and let's take a look at this velocity and see what it does for me. So what does the velocity tell me when I'm moving? So first of all, if I don't touch the screen, touch my WASD keys, I'm getting a velocity. I want you guys to know this because regardless, I'm getting a velocity, right? No matter what I do, I'm getting a vector, right? Even though I'm moving towards, I'm saying that if I press the W key, the input, I'm not getting anything, right? Because I want to move towards, what I'm looking at, right? I want to move towards what I'm looking at. So let's translate this vector, right? The vector that I have right now, and I want to multiply it by something, right? So let's do that. Now, there's two ways to do this. I can multiply or I can add. Let's add because that makes it a little bit less crazy, right? So I'm saying the velocity vector is I'm moving towards a particular location, and then plus I want to add something like, my vector3 dot forward, right, multiplied by some kind of the W key, which is my x-axis, right? Is that something that I can do? So wherever I'm looking, that's what I want to move towards, right? and I want to multiply it by this vector by something else. What's going to be my velocity at the end? So let's take a look at that and see how that works, right? So we're trying to figure it out, right? So again, if I press the button, any one of my, I'm pressing the, kind of the x-axis here, or the y-axis. If I press the A or the D keys, you can see that the z-axis changes. Guys, I'm going to have to be right back. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to answer the phone. I'm going to come back, and I want to see if you can solve this problem, right? Before I come back, I don't want to always do everything. Think about the code that we have. What is it that I have to put in here, right? As an example, what do you recommend, right? That we can modify something where I can use move towards or some unity function to do this. I'll be right back. All right. All right, back. So, solutions. What are your thoughts? Again, remember what we're trying to do. It's more difficult in 3D. If we were only in a 2D plane, we didn't care about the angle of look, it'd be totally easy to take care of, right? Because all we'd want to do is move to the right or to the left if we were hooked onto a particular place, right? But here is we're looking, right? So actually I'm changing the rotation and I want to move towards something. So let's think about some stuff that we can do. So here's something. If I say something like unity 3D move towards. And let's see what this looks like. Remember, we're not allowed to use a rigid body, right? That's one thing we can't use, but we can use some basic stuff. And it says calculate a position between the point specified by current and the target, moving no farther than a distance specified by max distance delta. So here's a move towards example. So where they say that I have a transform, the target is a cylinder, right? And the position, the cube at the origin, transform position is a new vector 3. We start off at 0, 0, 0. That's what that does. So we start off in the middle of the screen. And then create and position the cylinder, reduce the size. So they did this with making a cylinder, grab the cylinder values and place it on the target. And then we use the position the camera properly. This is what they're doing here, which is kind of what we've done, right? And this is all in the start method. This is just setup. Then in the update function, we use a distance move, and I want to move towards from the transform position to the target position, whatever that target is, right? And in some kind of step increments, which is going to be our move. We modify the transform position to do this, right? That's what we're doing, okay? So if the position of the cube and the sphere are approximately equal, then we can calculate, it'll keep on moving it by itself. So this is what this transform position does. It moves, again, we modify the transform depending on where we're looking, right, towards the, towards the target in terms of the energy that we're putting. So basically we can only do kind of a forward and back. That's what move towards does. The target position and the transform position, and then we use move towards with a step. That's what it does. The step would be the speed times time dot delta time, whatever that's going to be. Calculate the distance to the move, right? So that's kind of what we want to do with move if we're using move towards, okay? But move towards is not the only way we can do it. All right, so let's taking that into account then, if we were to modify what we have in our code, right? Guys, I may run overtime, and that's okay for me. If it's not okay for you, you can go, and this session will be recorded for you to help you. All right, remember, and also I'm going to put this up on GitHub when we're done. So don't worry about that. For me, I'm okay, but I don't want to, kind of make you guys go crazy. So that's what velocity does. Velocity is here for us to, we want to take our max speed and we want to multiply it by some kind of, input. So we can do vector3 forward.x, but what if we said, I want to take my, my y. So remember, move forward up and down, which is W and S, right? Let's move forward and back, right? And I want to use my max speed multiplied just by moving forward and back. Let's say multiply this by X. Let's see what that does. X will vary between a negative value and a positive value. That's what it's going to do. When it's 0, it's not going to move at all. That's what the vector velocity is going to be. So it's going to change this altogether. And we're just going to change this to exactly what it says. So transform dot position is going to be equal to this. So we're going to take move forward of whatever this thing looks like. Okay, now, are we going to move? Remember, we saw that if when I rotate myself, I also move somehow. Right, let's see what this does for us. So going back to this, then if I run it, what am I going to get? Let's take a look at that velocity. So again, I'm moving around, and if I press the W key, right, then you can see that the velocity that I'm getting, well, I don't know what the velocity is, but I'm going like super slow. Like I'm not, if I'm doing anything at all, right? If I move the D, if I press the D key, right? So the A or D keys, that kind of does it right away. Like if I'm not even touching the camera, let's just reset for a second. And let's see what that does. So again, I'm looking where I'm looking. There we are. Here's where I'm looking, right? And then I'm not touching the mouse anymore. And if I press the D key, I got kind of go way over there, right? Press the D key again, nothing, and nothing. The A and D key don't do anything. The W and S key doesn't do anything. But the D key, whether I hold it down or not, right, it snaps too. That's what it does, right? Move towards, right? I'm looking where I'm looking. And So move towards is transform forward, right? That's my location, right, as an example. And then to some, for some amount, what this is the distance that I want to move, right? But really, when we think about this is where I want to be. So what if I said transform forward multiply by max speed, right, instead, and then my x-axis is the amount, right? So I said like, hey, my x-axis is where I want to go, right? My x-axis being horizontal. Let's go with vertical. Let's go the y-axis, the y key. So when I press the y key, I'm going to move forward. That's move towards where I'm looking, right? Times the speed, which is the distance that I want to go. That's where I'm going to be, right? With some kind of y speed, right? And then I want to multiply this again. Let's multiply that again by max speed, right? Because max speed being very low. I want to keep doing that every frame, and I'm going to keep updating my position based on where I want to be. All right, so where I want to be is always ahead of where I am. All right, let's see how that works. And let's see if, and again, I'm just using the stuff that we have with Unity to see if we can make any sense of this. So if I press the W key now, I flash way out of the distance. Like where is my camera now, right? So my camera is like, let's look at the camera here. The camera, hey camera, where are you? So here's where my camera is. My main camera is like 2,000 distance, right? Take a look at that. Here's my camera. Meanwhile, my max speed is 10. What does 10 mean? It means that I'm adding 10 units of speed every single time. Because we can spam everything, let's multiply the y-axis by time times delta time, dot delta time, right? So that it slows it down. So we're not spamming because we're inside of an update function. All right, so let's see how that works. And again, I want you guys to understand this. That's why I'm going so slow. So again, if I press the W key, now we can go back in and out. And no matter where I'm looking, I can go in and come back out, right? Go in to some degree and come back out. I don't have full motion because I've limited my rotation, but I can definitely come out, and I can definitely move and then turn around and come back in, right? So that I can do. I can't move left and right though. How do I move left and right? Because vector 3 forward is where I'm going to move, right? This is forward control, right? Does that make sense? To some degree. It's not perfect, by the way. And this is where, going back to my clamping idea that we had before with the clamp, with my y-axis being minus 90 and 90, doesn't make me happy, right? So you may want to choose another number or not clamp. Let's see what the not clamping does for me. Just clamping is weird, right, when it comes to the other way around. So let's try that one more time. So again, I'm not clamping now, and I want to move there, right? It's not quite precise, right? I want to move over there. Let's clip onto it, and I want to move up, and I want to move back. So I can kind of use my controls as you normally would do it, right? But my right and left, I have no right and left motion whatsoever. So let's add that in. So, and then we'll kind of see what the velocity looks like. For now, we don't really need this velocity factor whatsoever, so we'll take it out. And let's keep working. So cool, I was able to move. And this transformed up position is really based on my Y input, right? But I'm changing my transform position with this. And let's say this is my new position. Let's just say we're going to make a new vector 3, which is the new position. Okay. That's what I want. So the new position is a vector 3 forward towards like this, right? And what I want to do is I want to have two new positions, right? I want a new position on the x-axis, or sorry, on the horizontal, and I want a new position on the vertical. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going A and D, which is across the horizontal, W and S, which is across the vertical, and I want to go A and D, which is across the horizontal. So this is kind of like so so move forward, right, is what this is, move forward. And then what I also want to do is another vector 3 that moves sideways, right? Move sideways could be a vector 3, the same move towards, right? Same move towards, but what I want to do is this move forwards, my transform position is where I start, and instead of transform forward, I want to do transform. Can I do a right? Right? Transform right is what is to the right of me, right? Instead of y, let's use x, right? And we'll still multiply by delta time. So those are the two things, move forward and move sideways. Can I not just add those things together, right? Because I got two vectors, and if I add them together, wouldn't I have the velocity vector? So in other words, I can say transform dot position, right, is equal to move forward plus move sideways. Can I not do that? Is that not a thing? Let's see how that works. Does it even work at all, right? I mean, if I didn't have move sideways, it's almost the same, right? Move forward is just another way of saying this, right? And I kind of did that. We know that works. But how about if I add move sideways to it as well, right? How does that work? So let's do it. So, okay. So now I got an issue. It says something wacky. It says screen position out of the view frustum, right? I went like crazy, crazy way out to into no man's land, right? When I kind of created that, right? So why is that? Well, I'm kind of doing things, if move sideways, right, is I'm moving towards my right based on a maximum speed. That's what I want to do. And depending on my x-axis, which I'm getting from the horizontal, right, that's what I'm getting, and multiplying it by delta time. And then I'm adding move sideways every time, right? So, you know, I'm getting a value here no matter what I do. What I really care about is not the little nuance movement, right? I mean, I could, but I'm getting this x-axis. So what if I just move sideways? Is that a problem? Can I move sideways first? Think about this for a second, guys, please, because this is you know, something we want to conquer, right? So let's try this out now, just moving sideways. So moving sideways, can I do it? So position, and if I go left, I'm kind of moving, but it's weird. I'm kind of moving in and out. Is that really what I want to do? Right? That's not what I want, right? How come it didn't work? It's kind of moving in and out again, even though I'm using the other controls. So right and left, but I'm moving in and I'm moving out. So what is wrong with move towards? Well, okay, so transform position is where I'm starting, and transform right is what's happening, right? And I want to multiply it by max speed, and I want to move towards the left or the right. So I want to transform my depending on where I'm looking, I want to kind of march to the right or march to the left, right? So what do you recommend here? Again, we're move towards is an interesting idea, but remember what we're trying to do here. We're moving the object. We're moving my object, and move towards, it says calculate a position between the points specified by the current and the target, moving no farther than the distance specified by maximum delta, right? Whatever this new position is going to be. This is move sideways, right? What's the difference? How come this didn't work like I wanted it to? Same thing, but now my where I'm looking times my max speed, right, is what I want, right? My right side times max speed. Well, let's see how this looks inside of the screen here again. So run, and let's do a couple things here. I'm just going to pull this down here again so we can see what's happening with the camera. Let's go to the main camera here and focus in there. So this is the main camera, right? And okay, so if I type in, look at what's happening. So it's actually, is it doing what I'm telling it to do? Look, here's the camera, right? And let's see if I can get the gizmos working, because it looks like the gizmos don't want to work for me. It's the main camera, right? And it'd be nice if we had the gizmos working, but they're not. Okay, so right here, not the directional light, but the camera. So this is what the camera is looking at, but take a look at, so when I move, right? Oh man, I was afraid of this, right? So you can see what the camera is looking at, right? So if I move to the right, then I should move directly to the right, right? But the problem is my camera also has a bit of an angle, right? So because my camera is angled downwards, right, it's going to go with wherever my right currently is, right and left. And so it's kind of at a weird pitch, right? So, here's my camera moving right and left, right? You can see that the camera is clearly moving right and left, but it's not moving exactly to the right. It's moving according to my pitch. I can't go forward and back because forward and back is the other one, all right? But right and left, it kind of, depending on how my camera is pitched, that's how it's going to move. Because remember, I can pitch my camera in any way I want. That's kind of an issue, all right? Yes, you can make gizmos for sure, right? For sure. All right, so cool. So, but what happens when I combine them? What if I take my transform position and then I add in this part? Well, this actually returns a vector, right? That's what it does, this vector. And move sideways, I mean, really what I want to do is move towards the right without affecting anything to do with my front. I don't want to move my forward motion at all. It's only moving to the side at some amount, whatever that amount is, right? So why can't I just add these two vectors together? Well, I start off at my transform position, right? And then I add my transform position twice, right? That's why it's like double the speed, if you will. So, I mean, but even in that case, it's almost like it's multiplying, right? When I add those two things together, because I get vectors back from these two, a vector 3 and a vector 3, one is okay, right? So if I just do move forward, right? Move forward, that is okay. But if I add both, right? If I add both, then I get a weird motion, right? So here's forward, no problem. And this looks pretty accurate, right? Wherever I'm looking, it'll kind of, I can move around. It's not bad. It's not terribly good either, but it's not bad. I can kind of maneuver with this. But going right and left, meh, it's not going to work. So what else? Why can't I add those two things together? Well, we can bring that vector back to take a look at it for a second, right? So if I take a look at, let's call this velocity, public float, right? And we'll call it velocity, right? And let's say my public float velocity is some amount, whatever that's going to be, right? So let's say it starts off at, well, actually, instead of a float, we'll make it a vector 3. Okay. And how about we spell vector properly? How about? So here's my vector 3 velocity. How do I keep track of this stuff? So before we transform at all, let's add those two things together. So instead of this, we'll say velocity. This is our debug. Move forward plus move sideways. What does move sideways do? They're two different vectors, right? And I'm adding them together. So let's see what happens. So run, I'm not going to move it all now, but we're going to see what the result is going to be here. So we already have a velocity, right? Minus 14, whatever. If I press forward, right, it's going to snap back. Look how that works. So I snap back to whatever it was, right? If I move to the right, you can see that the effect of this. So forward on the y-axis, it doesn't move in the y-axis really at all. It stays pretty much the same. It slides a little bit. And on the x-axis, you can see what's happening on the x-axis, right? On the x-axis, it's cycling, right? But it's not really moving, right? And again, if I go the other way, I'm adding to the positive. So that's what it does this way and that way, 13 and 10, all right? Right now, from a position perspective, if you think about the position, if we made this velocity the new position, right? Take a look at where we are right now. It's multiplied it by 2. So my position, x and y coordinates, right, as an example, it's literally just taking my x and y coordinates and multiplied them by 2. That's what it's done. Look, my transform up here. My transform minus 7 and becomes minus 14. 5 becomes 10 and minus 7 becomes minus 14. Right? Because it adds transform twice. That's what it does. It adds a transform twice because of what we're doing here. Move towards. So is there a way we can combine these, is what I'm asking, right? I want to take, this is my target position, my target. And it's almost like I want to add these two things together. I want to take my transform forward, multiplied by my max speed, right? And my transform right, multiplied by my max speed, that is my target, potentially, right? Right, if it's positive, it's going to go to the right. If it's negative, right, this option here is going to go negative, right? So whatever that's going to be, right? So this is the total distance. When I take this transform forward and right and add it together, that is the distance maximum that I'm going to go, right? So what if I took my, depending on which one I'm hitting, I only do one of these move towards, not both. Okay, only one of them, right? So how would that work? Okay, because I'm adding transform position twice. That's why this is happening. I'm saying, hey, transform position, take this, and then take this one too, and add that back in, right? This is my starting position, right? I could make this 0. That's another thing I can do. I can say that this is starting off at vector 3, 0. Okay, so I start off at vector 3, 0. I point to where I'm pointing at, right? So I add nothing. And then what happens if I add my move forward and move sideways? Well, it really depends on, and then I kind of add in my transform afterwards. I kind of say, well, here's my velocity, and then let's add my transform after that. So plus transform, my position. So this is my position. I'm moving my position. That's what I want, right? I'm not rotating anymore. I've already done my rotation down here with the mouse look. So now I'm just going to transform my position. I'm going to add my transform to these things. Is that possible? Let's see how that looks. So I'm adding my transform twice. Now I'm going to add my transform once. Let's see if this makes any sense. All right, so this is pretty cool. Look, I've got my transform in there, and if I press to the right, I get some kind of motion to the right, right? And if I go to the left, I get some motion to the left, a minus, right? But it looks like the same values. Take a look at that. So whether I'm right or left, right? I mean, it's weird, you know? And if I go forward or back, I have some kind of motion forward or back. I got some of this, right? Back and forward, all right? But it doesn't do it, it doesn't add it twice. So that's good. So this is kind of what I want to do. So couldn't I just change this velocity to say transform dot position then? So transform dot position is equal to move forwards plus move sideways, if any. I may have none, plus my transform my position, which is I'm adding my transform dot position back in. Whatever my current transform position is It's like I'm saying plus equals to this, right? Okay. But these are not also adding in. So let's see how that works. So again, I'm breaking this down so we can kind of understand it together, and let's go on. So if I do this, and if I press forward, I move forward. If I move left, I move left. If I move right, I move right. And now I can kind of navigate a little better than what I had before. One thing that's missing is my E and my Q keys, right? Where E and my Q keys transform me up and down. So I have an up and down transformation as well as a look forward and back, right? Because if I'm, to be clear, if I'm here in the editor, if I go, if I press forward and back or left and right, if I press the E key, I go up, and the Q key, I go down. And I want to have those controls in there as well. So that's how we solve this one, move forward and sideways. And what we're really saying is plus equals, right? Because we're saying take this and simplify it. This is this piece, right? And if I was to run this again, it's going to be the same result, right? Plus equals. We can see that the camera now moves kind of how we expect it to move, all right? And that's kind of a fly through. This is pretty cool, right? We're just using two of these. It's kind of a, you're going to see later on, there's other ways to do this, but we're killing a bug with the sledgehammer using this. So now I want to do move upwards, and we need a z-axis for this, but we don't have a z-axis, right? So we want to create a z-axis where we have a positive and negative, right, value for the up and down, right? A positive and negative. So I want the E key to go up and the down, the Q key to go down, right? Because if you notice, remember, if I'm here, if I press the E key, I go up, and the Q key can go down. So let's do that. So I'll say float E, right, is equal to, and we can call this what it is, up, right? And that's equal to the input dot get. Now this is, we can use a get key, and where we have our key code, and we can say key code dot E is the way we get access, right? But notice that what this gives me is what this returns for this input is a Boolean, right? So get key code E, it says cannot convert source code Boolean to float. That's what this returns, a Boolean. Am I pressing the up key or not, right? That's kind of how it is. That's the get key. And if I get key up or get key down, it also returns a Boolean. I return a Boolean. That's what this is, Boolean. And if I'm up or down, that's key down, right? If I press the key down, if I hold the key down only once, that only happens once, right? It says returns true during the frame the user starts pressing down the key identified by the parameter. This one, if I push get key by itself, it says returns true while the user holds down the key. So this is the one I want, get key, right? And I want to do the same thing with, if I can type, I want to do the same thing with down. So I want to say, when I get key down, I want to get input dot get key, and then key code Q. Okay, so I get input from my E and my Q, right? That is another axis, right? That I'm getting, right? This is definitely a way to do that, or I can make my own, right? Instead of horizontal and vertical, what is the other one? What would be the other one called? Horizontal and vertical axes. Vertical, I want to climb. That's further from my keyboard. What I want to go in. That's what that's what the other axis is that I'm going to use, right? So this is kind of an up down axis, and I can create that. That's another option I can have. Instead of doing this where it's Booleans, I want to have the same thing that I'm getting here with my horizontal and vertical. Okay, so let's go and look at File, edit project settings, and you can see that we have our input manager right here. And these are all the stuff that we have, okay? So this is horizontal. Horizontal says that in my horizontal, the name is called horizontal, the negative button and the positive button. And there's alternatives for negative and positive. The gravity, if there's any, the dead zone, and the sensitivity. I want the same thing to happen with my own axis, right? So if I want another one, what if I said I want 19 of them? That's my size, right? Is there another one? Well, what it does is there's two cancel buttons. Let's go back to 18 for a second. There was two cancel buttons and two submit buttons, right? My second submit button, notice that it says submit and submit. There's two submit buttons down here, right? And a cancel. So let's change one of the submits. So instead of it saying submit, because it's just a button, right? I want to add a new axis. That's what I want. I want to add a new one, right? So I want to kind of copy the horizontal axis again. I also have another horizontal axis down here. There's two. There's one up here and there's one down here, right? And it's kind of like I want this horizontal axis to be the same thing. But instead of horizontal, we'll just call this the up axis, right? Because that's what we're doing, up and down. We can define a, let's take a look at the horizontal axis as an example, right? So this up, then the negative button, right, would be the Q key. The positive button would be the E key, right? We don't have alternatives for these, right? The gravity, we can say that is 3 and 0, 0, 0, 1. And the sensitivity is also 3. And it says, do we want to snap it? Sure. And do we want to have a joystick axis? We'll say the type is going to be keyboard and mouse. For the up axis, that's what it's going to be, keyboard and mouse, right? And that's going to give us our own way of using the up key. Up key will actually kind of use Q and E instead of it being input.get key, right? I just killed one of the, there's an extra horizontal. This thing comes with 2 horizontals and 2 verticals. So here's a vertical and fire buttons and stuff like this. I've just killed one of the horizontals. So there's 2 verticals. There's a vertical here, and there's also a another horizontal, and you have multiple ones. So it hits different joysticks and stuff like that. I'm just changing one to up. Okay. So now I can say, instead of this, which is cool, I can say float. I can say up is equal to input.getAxis, or we can say this as Z, right, is equal to input.getAxis up. It's got to be spelled the exact same way we've defined it in our input manager. We called it up, and that's the name, the friendly name of the axis we've defined, right? And we've added a negative button, which is the Q key, and a positive button, which is the E key. To track this, let's see if it works. And let's put in a debug log. And where I want to track the Z axis, whatever that is, right? So let's see how I track that. And if I track it here, then let's see if I press the E key or the Q key, what it gives me, okay? So if I run it, I can say, if I press the E key, I'm getting 1, or the Q key, I'm getting -1. Okay, so positive and negative, right? And by the way, if you don't like these, if you want more snappy motion, try GetAxis Raw. What GetAxis Raw does is it normalizes the movement. So it doesn't give you that. It's either 1 or 0. You know, it's 0 or 1 or -1, right? So that's what GetAxis Raw does. Try that for movement. And if we tried that and reran it, and let's just try the other ones, the regular buttons first to see how that looks. So right, if I press the W key, same idea, but it's snappier. It's a little bit more control, right? And what about if I press the E key, right? I get a 1 or a -1. 1 or a -1, which is pretty cool. Really clean kind of axis movement, right? So that's what I get with the E key, E and Q, where E is positive, Q is negative. Well, if that's true, and if I can do this, then I can do another move towards, right? Because I want to be able to move up and down. So I can take this thing, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to say move up, right? And move up is going to be vector 3, 0. Instead of transform right, I'm going to transform up, which is a thing, max speed times my z-axis, which is what I've just defined, and I'm going to add that in to my transform. All right, so that gives me all 3 axes. I can move all 3 with all of the things that I've defined, right? And let's see how that works. Again, killing a bug with a sledgehammer, but we can do it, right? So this is up and down now. Look, up and down, forward and back, left and right. And now we have complete control over how we want to navigate the entire scene like we normally would have. Yay, that took a while. Questions around this, right? So input is what we've been focusing on so far today, right? Input. How do I get input from the keyboard, right? And once I have input from the keyboard, then I can do plenty of beautiful things. Like, let's suppose I want to press the backtick character like we've done in SDL and remove the canvas, right? So let's fix that canvas because it's bugging me anyway. So first of all, let's go back to here, right? And this is the canvas control that we see. The canvas is actually something that we're seeing here. So this is the canvas item. And here's my panel. And my panel is stretching right now to fit. I don't want that. So you can see that I have a stretch happening. Let's go back to the scene. And I'm going to go in 2D while I mess with my canvas. So I want to fix this problem first. Go back to my panel and remove it from this and just choose this. So I'm not stretching anymore, right? So I've just kind of selected the center, right? That's my panel. I'm not stretching anymore. The stretching is gone. I've just put it in the middle. So what that middle means, it's the middle, it's relative to the middle of the canvas. Well, that doesn't make any sense because it's always going to be relative to the middle of the canvas no matter how big it is. I want it to move with the size of the canvas. So it's really going to be the top left corner. So wherever my top left corner, this panel is going to be relative to it. If I was to run this now, you're going to see that it doesn't matter if I close this or not, my panel is always going to stay the same size. Okay, so that's the first thing. Next, I want to program this panel so that it turns on or off. I'm not going to animate it right now, okay? I'm just going to turn it on or off. So it's going to appear or disappear. So how do I do that? Well, panel is actually a game object, right? And what I want to do is create something called my panel controller. You might call it, my UI controller or whatever you want. And let's do that. So let's run this here. I'm going to make a new C# script. We'll call this UI controller. Okay, guys, again, thank you so much for sticking around. I know we're over time, but I want to spend as much time as I can with you, giving you what you need to make your life a little easier is what I'm trying to do. All right, so UI controller, and if I go to my canvas, and if I drag and drop my UI controller to it, now I can control my canvas. Well, it's connected to my canvas, and I can change my object, right? So how does this work? I want to press a button, input again, right? I want to press a button. So I want to say, and the button I want to press is going to be in an if statement. If my input.getKey, and I want to do it only once, so get key down. If my key code is going to be the backtick character, not K, but what keys do I have? These are all the keys. And it's called backquote. right? So if my input.getKeyDown keycode.backquote, if that's true, that's all I have to do. If that's true, then I want to I want to deactivate my canvas. But if I do that and my UI controller is on there, right, then I won't be able to see it anymore. Okay. So yes, I could definitely put my UI controller on my canvas. I could do that. But if I did that, like we normally did with the camera, if I deactivate it, I also deactivate my script, which is not a great thing. So yeah, that's a nice idea, Tom. Excellent, excellent. But I can't put it here. Let's remove it. I need to put it somewhere else. And typically what we do is we have a game controller. You might have that for your game and that you're doing with JOS, like the in your labs. But let's make an empty object, call it an empty, and we'll call this thing game controller. And we'll still put the UI controller on it because we can have other scripts on the game controller. Let's zero it out. So the game controller is going to start off at 0, 0, 0, 0. It's an empty object anyway. Take the UI controller and attach it to this. Now what we need to do is get a reference to that object, to the canvas, to the panel, right? But I'm going to get a reference to the panel as a game object, not as a panel. Those are two different things, okay? So let's do that next. So yes, we've called it UI controller, right? And I want to basically, kind of turn it on and off, right? So let's do that. So I want to say that I want to get a reference to, so public, and we'll get a reference to a game object called our panel, right? It's pretty simple. And when I press the key down, I want to say that whatever the active state is, I want to reverse it. So I want to say that panel.setActive, and I can say that panel dot, and I want to say if it's active or not. Is active. It's like I want to say if is active in scene, right? So it's almost like game object dot is active in scene, right? That's what I want to do. Panel is a game object, so it has all these other things that we can access, right? Is static, right? And so on. We can set active, but that's a setter, and we want to see other stuff here as well. So there's a bunch of stuff we want to do. So how do we get the scene status if the panel is active or not? Because panel is just a game object, right? So again, we can check that. We can say that, let's do that. We'll say check if game object is active, right? How do we do that, right? And it says if game object dot active, all right? Let's see if that's true. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that's an old piece of script, but let's see that if that's true. Dot active, yeah, see? It says active in a hierarchy, yes. And if it's active in the hierarchy, then we're going to make it, the reverse. So we're going to say whatever it is right now it's going to be whatever it is. So if the panel active in hierarchy is false, we're going to make it true. If it's true, we're going to make it false. This creates a toggle. Okay, let's see if that works. So I press the key down, the back quote character, and it kind of turns on and turns off the panel. And let's see if that works. So let's play. And let's just move this aside. We don't need this over here. And if I press the back quote character, well, it said that you didn't assign the panel. All right, so that's what it's basically saying. That's the error. So in my game controller, that's nice, Tom, but what we need to do is do this. We didn't make that reference. Okay, let's try that again. Good. And if I press the back quote character, then we can kind of turn the panel off and on. And sometimes you want to turn it off because, it's not really great. We want to only turn it on when we want to make a change, which is what we normally did in our scene before. So again, we did this, and maybe what we want to do is when we enter the game, we want to make the panel turn off. So panel set active as false by default. We don't want to have the panel turned on by default. We want to turn it off, okay? So when we start the game. So if that means if I start the game now, even though it's here, and if I press play, then we're going to see that it's going to turn off. Right? When we start the game, it won't appear, right? And then I can do this, and if I turn it on, it's on. And then if I want to access it, here's something. If I want to access it, I don't want my ability to, I can't, like, I'm going to move my camera. I don't want that to happen. When I turn my panel off, turn my panel on, I want to freeze my camera. I don't want to have camera control. Right? So that's something that has to happen. So that's in the camera. So the camera controller is going to not work. I'm not going to be able to move around my camera at all. The move function in the mouse look will fail to work if my panel is active, which makes sense, right? And I'm also going to say that my cursor lock state is unlocked, right? I don't want to lock my cursor anymore if my panel is on. Okay, so I want to be able to move my cursor around. When I turn my panel off, I want my cursor lock state to be clear again. So I need a reference to the panel here as well, right? So I need another reference. So again, we're going to say header panel controls, or yeah. And we're going to say game object, and we're going to call this panel, and we're going to make this game object public, right? And what I want is to detect if the panel is active or not. And if it's active or not, every frame, I want to do that. Then I want to disable or enable my controls. Okay, so that's what it's going to be. So I can say that here, if not panel dot active in hierarchy, only then do I want to do this, right? And we can also say that when I switch, right? So here we're doing this cursor lock state or whatever, but that doesn't make sense, right? To do it here right now. Instead, let's do that cursor lock state in the UI controller, right? In the UI controller. So depending on if I'm active or not, right? If it's true, so if my, so we'll start it off as locked, right? So we'll say that by default, it starts off locked here in the UI controller. But then if I press the button and if my panel is unlocked, right, then the lock state will be whatever it's going to be. So how do I do that? Well, I can do that with a something like this, cursor dot lock state, right? But I only want to do it, I'm checking on update, right? So it's almost like I only want to do it when I press my button, right? So it's like I want to do it here. Only when I press my button do I want to check. I don't want to check all the time. So cursor dot lock state, that's going to equal to, well, it really depends if my panel is active or not. If my panel is active, right, then my cursor lock state is off. So if my panel dot is active in hierarchy, right, if this is true, then my lock state is, again, cursor lock none, right? And else, if it's my panel is not active in hierarchy, then my cursor lock state is going to be locked. So when I turn off my panel, it's going to lock my cursor. And I start off locked. Okay? Again, a couple of lines of code, but to do what we need to do, right? Let's see how that works. So going back to this, and if I run, we should still see the same effect where it's locked when I'm in here, right? If I press the escape or the back tick, it unlocks. If I press it again, it locks it again. So lock and unlock, unlock. But now what's happening is I can still move things around. So the unlock worked, but what about the move? So now this is where my game controller can work, where I can say that only if my panel active in hierarchy can I mouse, look, or move. I just didn't save this function or this file. Let's try that again and have that specific control. So again, Maybe I want to make a reference. How about that, Tom? So in my camera, I also want to get a reference to the panel. Right, there we go. And then run it again. So again, you can see my camera is good. It's locked. And if I press the escape key, I can't move around my camera anymore. I can't move forward or back. I can only do something here, right? If I press escape or the back quote key again, I'm good to go. I press it again, it locks my thing and it allows me to make changes. This is a key thing when I control my panel, guys. Make sense? Nice. All right. I know we didn't do a lot of commits, but I'm doing this to try and do as fast as possible because we're running overtime by half an hour. And I know that this is the case. Okay, so what about if I wanted to make a, I want to control a button. I have an OK button as an example, and I have a gravity scale, right? So I have a gravity checkbox, a gravity scale, and a button. Let's see if I can add control to these as well, okay? So remember, my UI controller is right now sitting inside of my game controller, but I'm going to use this one for everything else too. I'm going to make a button. So when I press my button, it's going to make, and it's going to give me some feedback like button pressed. Okay, that's what that's going to do. So I can do another event. I'm going to create it inside of my UI controller. Underneath my update, I'm going to say something like, and it's going to be public void on, we'll say OK button pressed, because it's for the OK button. You can make as many of these events as you want. I don't need to take anything else in, right? And when the OK button is pressed, I can say do a debug.log and say, OK button pressed. Okay, so that's what that is. So you can get input by pressing a button, like a turn off or turn on. Every time I press a button, it's going to show me this. How do I attach this to the button? So let's go back here and let's add it to this button. So again, if I go to the OK button, you can see that there's an area that's the button. And on the right side, there is a on click event. If I press the plus button, it gives me a little space where I can drag and drop something. I need to drag and drop the game controller because that's where the UI controller script is attached to. So like this. And then inside of where it says no function, we can pull down UI controller and on OK button pressed. Okay, so when I press play now, the only way I'm going to press that button is if the control is active. So I'm back to this. I press the thing, I press the button, and hey, look at that button event. Pretty simple. And I can keep pressing it as many times as I want, and I'm going to get input more and more times. That's buttons. So pretty simple. And the controls for buttons are the same as for the other ones, but they have different effects. Let's try the checkbox. That's the second easiest one. So here's my gravity checkbox. And I'm going to turn gravity on and off. This is something where you can say gravity's on, gravity's off. This is a toggle, all right, that I want to create. So again, here is my on value changed. It's a Boolean. Is it off or on? So here, we're going to make the same thing happen. So we're going to say public void on gravity and toggled. We're going to say, we can also say toggle gravity, right? And what we're going to say is, depending on the object, right, when I press that button, whatever, when it's checked or unchecked, I want to get the effect happening. So first, let's say we're going to press the button, debug.log, and we're going to say gravity check mark pressed. Okay, we don't know what's happening yet, but first, this is the second easiest one. We know that if I press this one, then it's going to spit out this thing like a button. Okay, and just like before, we need to press the plus, and we need to pull the game controller into there, and we can kind of go into UI controller and then on gravity toggled, this one. If I press run now, the only way we can access it if we expose the controller. And if I press this button, what I'm hoping is that I'm going to get a gravity changed. Okay, but how do I know the state? I'm not getting anything from this thing, right? I don't know nothing about this thing at all, right? Notice that it has some information, right? My UI controller basically says that depending on if I'm enabled, I can check to see if it's enabled or disabled. I can also check to see, if my game object, I can send a message, as an example, that it's on or off, right? And that's the kind of stuff that I can do. That's my UI controller has a lot of functionality here, in this little event, right? But what this is telling me is it's been clicked, right? That's what it's telling me. So this is, hey, I've clicked you. I've pressed the button. Okay, that's what it's done. Now I need to read it. And for this, what we want to do is get reference to the actual, we want to get access to the game object that is the button. But the problem is it has special values. And what we have to do here on the top where it says UI Unity Engine, let's add using Unity Engine .ui. Okay. So when I do this, then I can actually create a reference to the checkbox. So I can say something like, we know what this is, right? So I can say it's a text. If it was a text box, I can look at a button now as it was before. And if I want to go, I think it's called a toggle, right? So the toggle itself would be the the gravity button, gravity toggle. And let's make it so it's G for gravity toggle, right? And let's also add a header to make it nice. So we'll say something UI controls, right? Which is the header. All right. How about if we do it right and not do it the wrong way? Right. So there it is. It's a panel in gravity toggle. We know it's a toggle type. So down in here, we can say, well, what if I'm pressing this? What about the toggle, right? And which is the gravity toggle dot, what do I get? Is on. Well, that's pretty nice, right? If it's on, right, it checks if it's on. Well, I want to change the value, right? So, is there a way of me changing the value? So I want to change it so that it shows that it's off, right? So it doesn't show that I can't control it, right? It means that I can probably do something like is on is equal to not is on, right? So gravity toggle dot not is on, right? And whatever it was is now it's not, right? That's the kind of way we're doing. So we're going to show this is the button actually changing state. We can see it, right? So let's go back to this and let's see if it works. And we need to get a reference to in the game controller, we need to get a reference to the gravity toggle, which is the gravity checkbox. And by the way, let's just call it gravity checkbox because that's gravity toggle makes no sense. So we'll say refactor rename. We'll say gravity checkbox. Okay. It computes here, but when we change the name in Unity, then when we come back to here, it might lose its reference. Okay. Like so. So then we have to do it again. And let's press play. So again, depending on what I'm looking at, if I press this and I check it off, right, as an example, then, well, that kind of broke things. It says the requested operation didn't work, right? Well, because I'm telling it to do what I'm already doing in my UI. So I can check to see if it's on, right? So how about that? Debug log. Gravity is, right? And then if it's the state, it'll be on or off depending on if it's on or on. If is gravity checkbox dot is on, then gravity is on, right? And we can do this with a ternary operator by using like a prompt or something like that. is on, else debug log, when we press the button, it's off. Okay, so off or on, this kind of state, right? And let's see what happens if I do it this way, right? And by the way, it gives you suggestions on how to fix this in ReSharper. It says, hey, don't you want to do something like this? Right, which is way better. And I recommend this. It's just easier to do, right? Is on, then do something, is off, do something else. All right, and let's do that. Let's go back to this and try it out. So run it. And if I press it on and I click it, then we should see gravity's off, gravity's on. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So here it is. So here's what ReSharper does. It says, hey, we want to change the message. So check to see if gravity's on, and if it is, then use this message. If it's not, then use this message. Pretty simple. So that's gravity. That's a toggle or a checkbox, if you will. All right. What about the other one? The last one we're going to do for today, and then we're going to stop because that's enough, right? How about if I want to use a slider? This is more complicated. All right. And there's a couple reasons why. So if you look at the slider control itself, it gives you a minimum value and a maximum value, a 0 and a 1. So the thing to think about is what kind of control do you want, right? We can set the value that it's currently on, right? The slider itself, and it goes left to right, right? And then what about if I want a value that starts off at 0 and goes to something like 20? Right? So, and I want to start my value at something like 5. So you can see that the value, when I change it here, it changes the value here. And what I want is some kind of output so we can see what that value is in real time, not looking at it here, but actually looking at it up here, like a label. All right? That's what we want. So how do I do this? Well, we can make the slider smaller, right? And then we want to make a label that is kind of added onto this. So gravity scale is 1. Here's the slider, right? And then we want to have another label, right, which is the value label, the gravity scale value, right? So let's duplicate this, Control D, right? And we'll say gravity scale value label. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, and then we'll take this in our UI and move it over. And then what we want to do here is we want to reduce some of these things to remove what it says. So we'll say that the scale is 0. You can put whatever number you want in here at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's really just a starting value, but you want to test to see how big that number is going to be. And this is with no other additional like borders or anything like that, just simple box, right? That looks like this. So again, so we want to kind of go to here and then change it so that it's inside of my object. And then it's going to, if I want this, I want to center it, right? So it's going to kind of, whatever that value is, it's going to show over here. It's really up to you how you want to control this now when it comes to this. If you think that this is not big enough, we can make it bigger, we can make it bolder. I mean, lots and lots of controls. If you want it so it's aligned left, you can do that too. So if you want it to grow this way, however you want it, okay? So now what we need to do is we need to get reference to this gravity scale. How about if we say, so it's mentioned something like gravity scale and gravity scale here, gravity scale value. All right, so we have the gravity scale label, gravity scale value label. There's two different things, right? And the value label is what we want to access to modify. We want to modify this label when we choose this thing. We move this up, whatever the value happens to be. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's try this out. So the slider, this is the gravity slider. We'll call this gravity scale slider, right? Gravity scale label, gravity scale value label, right? So they're all kind of together. By the way, you can always combine these into some other kind of control, but we're not going to do that here, all right? So I need access to this one too, this gravity scale value. I need the slider itself, and I need this. All right, so first let's go into this, and I want to make another event. I want to say that I want to make another event where it's going to be on, uh, you know, gravity scale slider changed. When I change the value, and you might say on gravity scale slider value changed, just to make sure that you're very accurate if you really want to. You can make this talk to you however you like, right? And let's just do a debug log for now, and then we'll say something like value changed, and then 2, and we want to see what that value is, right? So we need a reference to the public slider control, which we're going to call the gravity scale slider. Okay. And in order for us to get reference there, we need to do that inside of this. So the gravity scale slider, we need to put that inside the game controller as a reference. So let's do that. Gravity scale slider, this one. And we also need reference to the gravity scale value label. So let's do that. So we'll say that's public. A label in Unity parlance is text. So gravity scale slider, or gravity scale label, like value label. Really long, it's fine. And we save that and go back, it'll give us another space, so we can drag and drop. And we can take that gravity scale value label and drag and drop it into there. So you can see we have lots of control here. And we're doing it by dragging and dropping it. We can always do it by finding these things, but it's just more challenging, and we don't need to do that. All right, so cool. We've got all these things here. Awesome. And so then at the bottom, the value scale is going to be changed to whatever the slider is dot value plus the slider, right, which is our gravity scale slider, dot whatever the value is. I want that there. The current value is what I want in there, right? That's what I want. All right, so let's see if I can read that when I change it. To add the event so it works, we need to go to the gravity scale slider and do the same thing as before. We need to press the plus button and drag and drop the game controller in there, which will allow us to look at that particular function for the UI controller, which is this one, the on gravity scale slider value changed, because this is on value changed event. That's why I called it that. And then if I press play, then we should see that when I press the backtick character and I change the value of this, right, then I should see a change. I can do this, but what about this? How come? There we go. It's finally working. And notice on the right, it actually gives me that value, and then I'm kind of turning it on the left, and whatever that value happens to be is the value that I'm getting, okay? Look at that. Look how difficult it is for me to do that. So if I click down here, nothing happens. And if I click up here, I'm not getting it. You know why? Because I'm clicking this thing too. Let me show you. So part of this is obscured because of my gravity scale label. So what I need to do is modify the gravity scale label here so that it doesn't touch the slider at all, because that's the event piece. Let's try that again. So again, backtick, and then now it's no problem. So whatever I change it to, it's automatic. You can see it actually in the slider itself, right? And this is the actual value, and then the value is down here. But what about, how come it didn't change? It didn't show me what the value was there. Well, we didn't modify that yet. So I want to say that whatever the slider value is, instead of printing it out to the console, I don't want to do that here. I want to actually show it in the control. So let's do that instead. So I want to say that my label, right? So my gravity scale value label dot text, well, that's going to equal to whatever my gravity scale slider is dot value, right? And the problem with this is it's not a string, so I can convert it to a string explicitly. It doesn't like this because to specify the culture, I'm not going to bother. Good enough. So gravity scale slider value toString. It will solve this and put this in there. So once I first turn it on, it's going to work. So again, going back to this and run it. And I press the backtick character and then I start moving it, then you're going to see the value changed. Okay, exactly what it's supposed to be. If I want it to be whole numbers, so I want it to go from, you know, a value like this, a gravity scale like this, that's okay. I can do that too, because you can check on whole numbers for that to happen. So one number at a time. Okay. I'm going to leave it as a floating point value because it's better. That culture allows you to, Sam, allows you to use it for, because a string is it's a local string for us. But what if I want to make it so that it's going to print out for another location? So I can do localization by printing it for a Spanish location or whatever. I can specify the culture. Anyways, but let's go back to this. So nice, but it doesn't start off with what my value is. And so I should read my value all the time, at least at the beginning. So when I first start off, I want to say that, hey, I want my gravity scale value label.text to equal to whatever that initially was, gravity scale slider.value, and then toString. So I want to do this the first time because I need to set this up the first time, because if I don't, then I'm never going to see it, whatever the current value is. At least not the first. See, it starts off at 0. But when I run it now, it's going to pick up 5, and it's going to put it in there instead. So again, I can turn it on, right? And then you can see it's 5, and then I can move it to whatever value I want. Okay, so I can check it on, check it off. I can press my OK button, whatever, and I can press I can get rid of and show my thing. And notice what it does in the hierarchy when I do that. It kind of shows it and disables it and then puts it back. Okay, guys, this is enough. This will give you control over sliding values, which is what we want, right? One thing to note is I cannot enter a value here manually, right? In order for me to enter a value here manually, I need another type of control. So right-click and notice that in UI you have other controls that you can explore. One of them is an input field. So what if I want to put an input field in here, right? As an example. So instead of a value like this, a label, right? What if we made this an input field? And the input field has its own, a bunch of things, right? One is on value changed, right? On submit and on end edit. There's a bunch of different kinds of events that this does. So when the value changes, it does something, right? So I can change the value manually, right? But here's something that I wanted to point out to you, right? If I was to allow the value to change when I'm typing in, what about if I want to display the value in there, right? Does the value change? And the answer is, yeah, it changed, right? So because it changed and I'm changing it by my slider, it's going to trigger that. It's going to trigger that that event as well, because at any time the value changed, it's going to be triggered, right? So that's something that that can happen. I can also make it read only, so I can only display something, right? As an example, it should activate on select. Yes. So this is something else that I can do. So what if I was going to display? Let's display it in both places, right? And let's see how that looks different than, which is an edit, an input field, compared to a label. So let's call this the gravity scale input field. So gravity scale input field, right? So there's that thing, right? And what I want is I want this also to be part of my UI controller. So going back to UI controller, let's do that as well. Public and then input, right? We're going to call this gravity scale input field, right? Okay, and what I want is when I start off, I want this gravity scale input field, and I want now look what I can do. Can I do value? Can I do text? How can I modify it, whatever that is? So the gravity scale input field, which is an input, right? That is an input, not a UI input, right? Input. So what about a text input? I want some kind of test, a text input, and it says base field, right? So text input base field, and it says, oh man, now you're going to have an issue. It says you need some UI elements in here. So how do I get access to that text input, right? Because that's what this is, an input field, right? Is there a smaller way of doing this without using an extra thing? So can I go input field? Yes, I can. And that saves me to do this. So input field is what I want. Now, do I get the right thing? I get text. So I want to say text, right? And I want to say the text is also equal to the same thing. So let's see if I can set the text to the same. It looks different inside of my UI, just to let you know. So here's my UI. You can see that it says enter by default. And when I look at the gravity scale input field, I have a placeholder, and that's where it's going to say enter text. You can remove that so you don't show an input, right? At least starting off. And then there's the actual text value itself, which we're going to start off with whatever we want. Let's try it out and see how that works. So again, I'm going to press backtick. And how about if we make a reference, because we didn't do that. Gravity scale input field. And then we'll press play. And when I do that, and I make a reference to it, you can see that it's 5. If I press in there, I can modify this, right? But I'm not going to get anything changed because I haven't responded to this event yet. Okay, but I do definitely allow me to do that. So if I change this, right, it doesn't change this yet. So how do I do that? Well, I can do the same thing I did down here. I can say that, hey, don't just change the thing, but also change the input fields. Gravity scale input field.text is equal to all of this. Guys, the very last thing we're doing. I'm so sorry to keep you so long. But I want to help. That's why I'm doing it, okay? So then, hold on a second, let's do that. And if looking back at this again, if I kind of press the backtick character and I do this, it changes. So that all changes like normal. Notice it truncates some of it, which is okay. We don't need all of this data anyway, right? And it looks better than this does. But I can also click into there and change it, right? But I don't have the change event. Let's see if I can do that now, right? And then we'll replace the label with the text field. Okay, so how does that work? Well, we're going to make another event, public void on gravity scale text field changed. And I think it's value changed. It is, no, value changed. Yeah, value changed. We don't have to do this. This is your discretion. You can call this like ABC. Doesn't matter. But this is whatever name you feel like giving it. All right. And then we're going to say that the gravity scale field, whatever it is, when it changes, I want the gravity scale itself, gravity scale slider, right, dot value to be equal to whatever the gravity scale input field dot text is, right? And now we need to cast this because value, right, as an example, value is a float and text is a string, right? So we need to cast this to float. So again, we can parse float. That's what I want to do. I want to do a single dot parse, which is a float. That's what it is. And I want to parse this as a float. That's what a single is. Single is a float. So I want to parse it. I want to make it into a value. Now this is suggesting that I can crash the system here because remember that I can enter an A in there as well. I can enter whatever I want, not just a numeric value, right? So, but if I change the value, then I change that. And if I change the value, then I change this. Will it trigger? Let's see what happens. So will it be an endless loop is what I'm saying. So now what we need to do is we need to make that value look proper. So I'm going to take that game controller and drop it in there. And we'll select a on text field value changed event. And let's see what happens when I do that. So boom. And here, let's press the field and I go in here and type in 20 and you can see immediately it changes right to 20. And what if I press 0? Then it craps out. So it won't allow me to do that, right? Because it's going to crap out like this because it's trying to immediately parse, right? So another way of doing this, if I want to do this is try parse, right? So that's another thing we can do. So if I do a try parse, right? And let's see if there's a try parse that we can do. Try catch. I wonder if that is a function that we can do only when certain things are turned on. So C# try parse. I think, yeah, it's in 32. Float. So I'm gonna have to do a float or a single dot try parse. And what try parse does is it says, so this is the string that I want to parse, the output, which is a float, the result, right, that we want to output to, and if it's true or not, right? Okay, that's what we're doing. So try parse, right, is really interesting, which is going to try and do it, and if it's true, if we get a good value, then it'll change the event, right? If not, it'll be 0, right? So that's how it works. So try parse, we can say, let's try parse this. And it requires another field, which is the result, whatever the result is, right? So that is the result of what I'm trying to parse. This is so let's give you an example of that. So let's go and do the float or single try parse method. Single try parse, right, to give you an example of how that looks. Here's your Microsoft Docs, and it gives you some suggestions on how that works, right? So again, public static bool try parse is the way it works, right? And it should give us some examples, right? So I have a string and I have an out, which is a float, which is a result, and I'm going to get that back out. So here are some examples, right? So if single try parse value out number, where number is the float, then I can output the number or not. So that's what I'm going to do. So that's kind of what's going to happen here. So I'm going to say if single try parse gravity scale input fields, and we're going to store this inside a float, which is going to be the value. We can't call it value. We're going to call it number, right? So here's the number out. Number out means like a reference. It's a reference to the number. If this is true, if true, then we're going to say that gravity scale slider value is equal to that number, right? Otherwise, we're going to say that it is equal to gravity scale value slider value. Gravity scale slider value is equal to 0, right? And actually, can I do 0? Because value is a float. Yeah, it is. We can do that. We can just say it's 0, 0.0f. All right, so that's how we can do it. And now it's suggesting. So the great thing is it'll try and convert it, which is great. So it says gravity scale slider dot value is equal to single dot try parse, where either we accept the number that we get out or 0, which is exactly what I'm looking for. But we need this number initially to start off with. And it tells me that, hey, maybe you want to do an inline out variable declaration, which does something that looks like this, out bar number. That's like a one-time fix. You don't need a single. I didn't add anything for single. System collection, Unity, and nothing else. I think, did it add system for you? Maybe that needs to add a system on your end. Okay, so add it in using system. All right, cool. So now that we have this, then if I remove something, that's good. If it computes, that's what try parse does. We're good. If not, it'll be 0. Okay, that's what it'll do. So let's try this out and see if it works and see if we have a rock solid way of entering data, right? So, because we want to do that. So again, we look over here and we press backtick and we press in there and press an A, it becomes a 0. If I back out, it's still a 0. And if I put in 13, right, or 10, or 0.3, it becomes 0.3. Whatever the number that's going to be, it'll be very precise now. And it's much better than what it was before. If I press enter, it's locking that in. So that will be the value that I want, right? If I go to 5, I can go back in there and go back to 5 or whatever value I want, and we're good to go, right? And let's make it so that the OK button, to fix this, to finalize all this, let's say that the OK button makes it go away, and we'll remove the scale value label with an input, which makes more sense for us. But I just wanted to show you the value label itself, so you can actually use values as opposed to things that we've done before. Let's go back to my UI here, which is here. We don't care about this anymore. And we want to remove the gravity scale value label. We're not going to use that anymore, right? Because we're going to use the gravity scale input field. So we can get rid of this. And anywhere else we reference it, like here. And as a result, we don't need it anymore. So we're going to go back to Unity. Last thing, guys, we're going to get rid of this in our design. And we can put this thing up there, which makes sense. More sense than what we had before. So a nice little gravity scale thing. And guess what? We have all this pattern. And if I really want to, I can select all these, as an example, this one, and sorry, this one, and this one, and I can select them all and then Control D, make another one, make another one, make another one, and keep doing as many as I want. But how does this change this? It doesn't change as much, but if I run this, you can see that now it looks pretty good, right? So I can, again, type in a value, 7, and then when I press OK, I want it to go away, right? So that's what OK will do now. So if I go back to the OK button control, which is here, I want to toggle it off. Well, we already have this piece, if key down, right? So I want to just take the same thing that's here and just toggle it off. But remember that the panel, right, is going to do something different, right? So I'm going to say that panel is this, and then I'm going to put this inside of the key, which is this, and get rid of the value. So instead of it toggling, it's just going to turn it off because now it's only this way. So we're going to say that the lock state is locked because when you press the button, the OK button means that you're done, right? And you're going to, you're going to go back to, you're going to turn it off. Okay, so that's what it means. No more toggle. It just turns it off. Okay, so let's try that out. And then we should be done. All right, so press play. And there we go. We'll toggle it on, press the button, we turn it off. Press the button again, we can change the toggle. It changed this nicely to whatever we want, right? We can uncheck and check the gravity, and you can see that we're getting response, and press OK to turn it off, or press backtick. I'm dragging in all the references, yeah. But again, it's really up to you how you want that to work. You can also find these references in the hierarchy in a different way. All right, let's save this, file, save project, and exit Unity. And let's put this up on GitHub. So again, I'm going to pull up Gitkraken, which I recommend for you. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to add all those changes, stage all the changes. How about this is the wrong one? Let's try that again with the proper one. How about that? And let's open a repo. Maybe I even have that repo here, which is, there it is. And let's do that again, stage all changes. And I'll say added camera, fly controls, and UI and UI. How about this? And UI controls, camera, fly through. And then push. And now you have all my code. You have all that stuff. So you're getting an error. That's a weird error. I'm not getting that error. Object reference not set to instead of not. Oh well, you have to. I would only get that if you're missing a reference. So here I'm not missing any references. I've deleted it, right? So that's why I did that. But you shouldn't have that issue. Yeah, I'm not getting that error anymore, right? So. All right. It's a Unity bug. It could be. Could be. Any questions around this before we go? I know there's a long session, guys, but I wanted to give you just the basic controls to give you back what you would have lost if you were using STL Engine. If you were using STL Engine, the one we built, then you would have had all this in IMGUI, right? And here, I've given everything you need for a couple of things. Fly through control so you can see your project from all angles, right? Which is really useful for you. And then the ability for you to modify what you're seeing here in the user interface. So it gives you an opportunity for you to, to modify values. And then when you're doing, your lab or when you're doing your assignment 3, then you have everything you need to change the values in real time. Okay. Any other questions before we go? All right, guys, I'm going to stop recording this. This is also recorded live. Hopefully we'll, if you need anything else, please let me know. But that's it for today for the recording. And that's it for me for today. Guys, thank you so much.